This week in gaming, we have the Microsoft FTC trial finally coming to a close, a remake nobody asked for, games disappearing forever unless of course you're a dirty pirate, a fighting game where we might be able to see Homelander and Omni-man go at it, and a lot more. Hey everyone, this is Fan to Games and I'm your host Rich. I've put together a list of the most interesting stories from the last week of gaming and I'm ready to get into it. Let's kick things off with Microsoft and the acquisition that has been a year and a half in the making as they try to acquire Activision on their way to owning every video game mascot on the planet Earth. Last week started with a court ruling in favor of Microsoft, leading us to think that everything was done, but that was only the first domino. Immediately afterwards, the CMA capitulated and said that they're ready to come back to the table for a deal in the UK. Then people started going after Judge Corley because her son works at Microsoft, which, mind you, had already been disclosed, and the FTC never complained about that relationship. The UK CMA then clarified that despite coming back to the table, that doesn't mean things will move quickly. At this point, we're still less than 24 hours removed from the initial court's decision, and I haven't even gotten to the FTC's appeal, so let me cut right to the chase. Sony has in fact struck a deal with Microsoft to keep Call of Duty and maybe other games on PlayStation for 10 years. Microsoft and CMA are working on a deal that allows this merger to go through, and Microsoft is working with Activision on an extension for their initial July 18th deadline. So while this deal is set to close sometime soon, we don't yet know how soon, and it likely won't be July 18th as initially expected. In all of the drama last week, it's important to point out that no one thinks the FTC put together a competent case against Microsoft. All of their talking points were in defense of Sony and never in defense of the consumer. Microsoft painted a picture that this deal helps the consumer, and the FTC never really tried to argue against that and instead focused on how much it hurts Sony. According to this tweet, the FTC mentioned Sony 76 times and mentioned the consumer 27 times. Regulation and regulatory bodies exist for the common citizen, and regardless of your feeling on the outcome itself, I find it discouraging that consumers played second fiddle to $2 billion corporations. Still though, this deal going through means that Microsoft and Xbox are out of excuses when it comes to crafting excellent single-player experiences. I don't care about exclusivity, and I don't mean this with regard to exclusivity, but increasingly there are a limited number of companies that can create large-scale, top-of-the-line single-player games, and of that list, I think Microsoft has not been pulling their weight. I won't turn this into a list war, just in the last 5 years I've been really impressed by the games released by Sony, Nintendo, Capcom, and Square Enix. And personally, I've been unimpressed by Microsoft's output in that same time. Would you agree, or do you think I'm being too harsh on Microsoft here? Either way, this merger should mean more quality single-player video games. In addition to the studios that they're acquiring, they've also harvested a literal cornucopia of intellectual property that is ripe for excellent games should Microsoft care enough to make them. Or if nothing else, they could at least give us Microsoft Kart Racer or their version of Super Smash Bros. Listen, if I can't pit Crash and Spyro against Banjo and Conquer, then I don't want it. Back to Sony, they did sign that deal to bring Call of Duty to PlayStation for the next 10 years, and it's unclear if that deal included other Activision Blizzard King games, as it did when Microsoft first proposed a deal like this earlier this year. It's starting to seem like Microsoft took advantage of this deal closing with or without Sony and told them it's Call of Duty or it's nothing. We'll see if that's true, but it sure would be weird to have the next Crash Bandicoot be an Xbox exclusive. One PlayStation exclusive that I did not expect to leak is a remaster of The Last of Us 2. I'm gonna be real with you, Chief. Nobody asked for this. This story comes to us courtesy of composer Gustavo Santaolalla, and quick side note, I think we can all agree that the soundtracks to both games in the series are excellent studying music. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. In a recent interview with Blender, Gustavo apparently suggested that new editions of The Last of Us 2 are in the works, and while this is a bit baffling, it would make sense to issue some sort of remaster when Season 2 of The Last of Us premieres, but that's not slated until 2025. It's unclear what sort of shape this remaster will take and whether or not owners of the current game will be offered a discounted upgrade, so it may be too soon to judge whether or not this new version can be considered worth it. Nonetheless, I'm feeling skeptical at the moment, and while I'm a fan of remasters, I struggle to see how they could make this package viable for previous owners of the game. What do you think? In other leaks, it appears that we'll finally have proof that Omni-Man clears Homelander in the fight to the death. Spoiler alert, skip to the next section if you don't want to hear leaks about DLC characters in a fighting game. Okay, was that enough time? So the first set of DLC characters for Mortal Kombat 1 leaked back in May. The 6 fighters are Quan Chi, Omni-Man, Ermac, Takeda, Peacemaker, and Homelander. That list seems like a fever dream, but it appears to be confirmed now thanks to the Vault International Studios account on TikTok. Captured here by Twitter user Idle Sloth, the account says MK confirmed when someone comments about the Call of Duty feature as well as the possibility of a Mortal Kombat feature. This seems to suggest that the initial leak was real, and I, for one, am looking forward to it. While Street Fighter is my preferred fighting game, MK has had the best cast of guest fighters for a number of years now, and it looks like Mortal Kombat 1 is set to be no different. Cyberpunk 2077 has now reached over 80% positive reviews on Steam, and while 80% would be considered a solid outing, it's not something you often see publishers celebrate. In this case, however, Marcin Mummet, the global community director for CD Projekt Red, took to Twitter to celebrate this milestone and thank the community for acknowledging all the hard work the team has put together over the years since the release. It does always suck to see a game release in a poor state at launch, but I like to see studios continue to update the game and right their wrongs. Good on you, CDPR. One future game I've had my eye on is Star Wars Outlaws. A gameplay demo was shown last month and it looked good, honestly really good. The format has left people wondering how big the planets are, and according to the creative director Julian Garrity, he says that traversing a planet with high-speed vehicles will feel like a journey and that each planet is the size of 2 to 3 zones in Assassin's Creed Odyssey. More importantly, each location is handcrafted and the studio has not procedurally generated entire planets the way that No Man's Sky or Starfield has. That's pretty cool and definitely makes sense for this sort of game. Final Fantasy XVI has been enjoying tremendous success, both critical and commercial. It's sold over 3 million copies so far, and gamers can't get enough of this title. According to TwistedVoxel.com, the development team has been getting feedback from fans who have played through the game, and a lot of them are interested in seeing even more. This has producer Yoshi P considering options regarding DLC, even though he says that FF16 was intended to be a complete story. This is certainly good news for those of you looking to play even more Final Fantasy 16, right? FF16. From new to old, Square Enix also says that they're considering remasters of their old titles. At least that's how they responded when they were asked about remasters at their latest annual shareholders meeting. By now, you've probably heard the rumors of the Final Fantasy IX remaster that is apparently in the works, and many people have mentioned the different remakes they would like to see from Square, like an HD 2D version of Chrono Trigger or a modern take on Dragon Quest VIII. For my taste, however, I'd love to see a Square remake or remaster of the quirkier games of the PS1 days, like Parasite Eve, Einhander, Ehrgeiz, Tobal No. 1, and of course, Vagrant Story. What a golden age for Square. Unfortunately though, when it comes to historical games, a recent study has now proven that 87% of classic games are not in release and are considered critically endangered. The Video Game History Foundation studied 4 different samples: the Commodore 64, the Game Boy family, PlayStation 2, and they also reviewed a percentage of all historical games they found on the website mobygames.com. Altogether, they studied over 2,500 titles and found that less than 15% were available commercially in some way. As they point out, this figure is comparable to the commercial availability of pre-World War II audio recordings or the survival rate of American silent era films. While some people will mention the ability to obtain these games through piracy, the Video Game History Foundation is specifically aiming to make more historical games available legally so that we don't have to resort to piracy to explore the history of these games. Ultimately, they're looking towards a library or archive model of some sort as a way of preserving these games alongside improvements to copyright law that will help archivists do this effectively, and in that way this study is meant to raise awareness. Here's hoping it's successful and the game industry works towards this effort. There were a number of awesome game announcements last week. Black Panther is confirmed to be in development by a new studio in EA called Cliffhanger Games. This new studio is said to feature veterans that have worked on Middle-earth: Shadow of Mordor, Halo Infinite, God of War, and more. Black Panther is awesome and definitely a good fit for action video games, so I'm going to be looking forward to this one. Dimension Shellshock is the new DLC for Shredder's Revenge. We knew it was coming, but they just announced the new survival mode DLC. It has a roguelike component that unlocks new abilities and hit points after death, and it should be a good way to keep this mode fresh even after repeated runs. Finally, 4 remasters were announced at a conference that was held by Limited Run Games. Those are Clock Tower, Jurassic Park Classic Games Collection, Toomba, and Gex. I'm particularly interested in those last 2, but honestly, I'm probably going to pick these all up. Well, that's going to do it for the first gaming news roundup on this channel. Definitely let me know how I did. Drop a like, maybe a comment, maybe a subscribe if you want to see more. If you don't know, I run another channel called Fan to Deck where I talk about Steam Deck news every week. I'll leave a link if you want to check that out. Hope you all have a wonderful day, a wonderful week, and until next time, goodbye.